6:10 Planning Commission meeting. First item on the agenda is the minutes from the March meeting. Do you have any comments on the minutes? If no comments, I have a motion to approve.
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Minutes are approved. First item is SD 2010-S01, final plan for Valley Forge Military Academy. Dan, we've been informed that that's going to be tabled into the May meeting. Is that correct?
That is correct. They sent in a letter requesting the board table this matter.
Okay. Can I have a motion to accept that and move that to May? May I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that'll be tabled to May. Okay, number 3 on our list is recommendation to the Board of Commissioners, the ordinance amending Chapter 280, zoning of the Code of Township of Radnor, Article XIIA, Wayne Business Overlay District, Section 2080-53.9, Special Regulations for the Wayne Business Overlay District, deleting subsection 2080-53.9A and substitute a new subsection 2080-53.9A regarding the drive-throughs. Everybody should have a copy of the ordinance. Does everybody have a copy? Okay. Danny, I'll throw it over to you to start.
This is an ordinance recommendation concerning a property at the corner of North Aberdeen and Lancaster Avenue. The owner of the property has requested that the Planning Commission approve an ordinance, as you just specified, modifying one section of the WBOD, the Wayne Business Overlay District Ordinance, specifically to allow, currently the WBOD ordinance prohibits drive-throughs within that area, and this change would now permit drive-throughs if they were used for prescription drop-off and pickups only. And that's what's before you.
Dan, again, just background driving this.
Strictly from the applicant.
Okay.
This is something that he wishes to redevelop the property. Again, at North Aberdeen and Lancaster, currently there is a Taco Bell and a former Blockbuster video store that is currently empty now.
Okay. So.
And the applicant is here if you have questions concerning it.
Great. I don't know if the applicant, if there's anything here they want to present first, or we just want to go right straight to comment. I'll leave that up to the applicant.
Good evening. My name is Don Petros. I'm an attorney representing the applicant in this matter. And I know that when we were here last month, we made a full presentation, but I see a somewhat different makeup from the people who were there. I know a couple of people, at least 4 of the people were here. I think last time, maybe 3 of you might not have been. And I don't know if you had an opportunity to see the meeting on the website or not. If you did, I won't repeat it. If you would like me to, I'd go through our presentation again. There is just, if you feel that's necessary, I'd be happy to do it. But
I don't. Does anybody want the presentation again? I don't think we need.
There's no change in here from what we saw.
no,
From what we saw, okay.
The wording is the same. There's no change. And I just would like to clarify just one issue. This has a long history, somewhat of a long tortured history. This is actually our 14th meeting that we've attended related to this project. But in October of 2009, we were before the Board of Commissioners on a public hearing to enact an ordinance that would permit the prescription-only drive-through by right in the WBOD. We had a full public hearing on that, and actually we had the public hearing the month before, the meeting before, the first meeting in October. And on October 26th, the Board of Commissioners decided that they would prefer to have the use by special exception than by as a use permitted by right. So they directed the township solicitor in consultation with the staff to prepare an ordinance that would permit this use by special exception in the Wayne Business Overlay District. And that is actually the ordinance that is before you. And Delaware County Planning Commission had also recommended that the use be permitted by special exception. So in that sense, I just wanted to indicate that it's and then following that, the commissioners introduced the ordinance in January of 2010. So I see it as their ordinance. I'm not trying to suggest that we're not interested in seeing this ordinance enacted, or that we weren't the ones who suggested that the ordinance should be enacted. We certainly did get the ball rolling, and we do want to have it enacted. But the history is that the commissioners, at least on 3 different occasions, expressed support for the ordinance and decided at the last moment not to allow it by right, but rather to allow it by special exception, the thought being that that would give them, the township, a little greater degree of control if the use were permitted by special exception. Then the ordinance was created, and the ordinance was introduced by the commissioners and sent to you and Delaware County Planning Commission for comment. Again, Delaware County Planning Commission recommended approval because it is now a use permitted by special exception in the WBOD. And again, if any of you would like me to go over the rationale behind it or any of the reasons, I would do that. But I don't want to bore you if you have had an opportunity to hear it. I'll just wait and respond to anything that may come up.
That'd be great, Don. Any
Okay.
questions for Don at this point while he's standing here in front of us?
Well, question for somebody. Why was this tabled last?
You know, I think there were some of the other members that were here, and I think it was even a 4-2 vote as to whether it should be tabled or not. Everyone had spoken on it that was here to speak on it, and
I was not here.
no, but I know you were not here. And I think there was a motion made to table it to this month, and I think that the chairman had indicated that sometimes with ordinance amendments, he likes to see them come back to 2 meetings rather than go through in one meeting. But I don't know, someone else may have some other view.
I just think, John, what we looked at last time was basically providing for this special exception, which would obviously apply to this one parcel. But one of the other thoughts was that if the special exception is granted, then the developer, the occupant of the building, can build essentially by right on that specific parcel without any regard as to how that could impact the rest of the business district. So you have a drive-in lane providing prescription drop-off pickup, but there really wasn't any other attention given to how that could potentially impact the site. So I think it was just tabled based on the fact that we needed to get a little more.
Yeah, I don't mean to be argumentative. That isn't exactly the way I remember it.
Right.
Some of the others may have their own recollections of it, but
Well, what is your response to that concern?
it's an ordinance amendment that applies not only to this site, it applies to the entire Wayne Business Overlay District. So theoretically, someone else could come in, for example, as we discussed at the last meeting, there are basically 3 major pharmacy chains in the area: Rite Aid, Walgreens, and CVS. CVS has a location that you're all familiar with. It's just outside of the Wayne Business Overlay District. And there's us, and then there's Walgreens. So theoretically, Walgreens could come in if they could find a property that met all the standards and criteria. So the ordinance was drafted and was gone over with input from some of the commissioners to the solicitor as to what the standards and criteria should be that would apply to everybody, not just to this particular application. And we don't think that it would have any adverse impact on the community at all. I'm from Radnor, and I kind of think of if you think of the CVS, and you know that some customers will pull in to the right of the CVS, and there's a little bit of parking in the back there between I guess what was the paint store and the CVS, and then go in that side entrance there. And then they'll go around the building. And I just think just picture a little window at the back side of that building that somebody could go through and pick up their prescription drugs instead of having to park the car and go in. And it's as simple as that. I don't see how that would impact anything. And that's the kind of thing that we're proposing here, something in the rear of the property. And I just don't see how that would have any impact at all on the walkability of Wayne or the intent of the Wayne Business Overlay District. It's an amenity to the people of Radnor who Some of them have written letters indicating that they're looking for this type of service, and we talked about the parent with a sick child. We talked about people that are infirm. Since the last meeting, we got a letter from a woman who said that she had surgery and she can drive, but she can't walk, and she wishes that she could pick up her medicine through this type of facility. So we think it's an amenity to the community, and we really don't see any adverse impact whatsoever on the community or on the Wayne Business Overlay District.
John, just to follow up to Matt, the reason we tabled it is that there was not universal agreement that there wouldn't necessarily not be some adverse impacts. And it was, I think, the bigger question of as much time that was spent on the Wayne Overlay District to bring in an exception that is so clearly counter to it. That we talked about it for a long time and lots of different aspects about it. And I think it worked out well that it was tabled because we got this Delaware County Planning Commission letter that in the last couple of weeks that we had a chance to review. And I think with the passage of time, actually, a couple of issues for me personally came up from the letter. I wouldn't have characterized this letter as a recommendation in the way that the applicant did.
Well, it does. I understand what you're saying.
You know, there were issues that were raised that
Right.
now we have an opportunity to maybe continue to address a few of them. But that's the reason, is that there wasn't universal agreement.
As I read the ordinance, and I apologize, I wasn't here last time, this ordinance seems to apply only to a property in this location. Is that intended to read that way, Dan?
No, it doesn't apply only to property in this location. It has to be a property on Lancaster Avenue that had frontage on another street, and those are the primary criteria.
So if there's another location,
Right, either through an assemblage of property or through somebody moving out, theoretically, there could be another one. Whether there will be or not, I don't know.
And I think, John, that was, maybe I misspoke earlier, but I think that was a concern that if you look at other parcels from Aberdeen heading west, you look at parcels like the anthropology store or the Wawa, this could apply to any of those. What I was trying to get to is that once we grant this exception, then other developers will have the same ability to create these drive-throughs for prescription medicine. It opens the window as to what other goods and services are critical to people, and I just brought up the idea of food or cash as another potential, possibility that we could be looking at down the road. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone was clear that we are granting this special exception for prescriptions, but it does broaden the question down the road.
I just have another question. Are we granting the special exception just to the whole Wayne Business Overlay District, and then at the same time simultaneously for the Rite Aid? I mean, are they two separate things?
Yeah, I mean, the way that it would work is that we're
Let
asking.
Dan answer that, if you don't mind, Don. That's
No,
okay.
this is to change the Wayne Business Overlay requirements. Rite Aid, if that's what ends up coming in, will come before you as part of
Again.
the land development.
Yeah,
Yes.
so they're only trying to get the right to come before us again for their special exception, to get approval on their special exception now.
Right, so if this gets approved and the applicant wants to move forward, he will have to go to the zoning hearing board, get the special exception, and then come back to planning commission with his development.
Okay.
We went through a bunch of steps that we'd have to go through for this development to come to fruition. And first, we'd have to get the Board of Commissioners to hold a public hearing and then enact the ordinance which would permit the use by special exception. And we'd have to go to the zoning hearing board and apply for a special exception and establish that we meet the criteria and we meet the other criteria for special exceptions. Then we'd have to go to the design review board for review by the design review board. Then we'd have to make a land development plan submission. We'd get staff review comments. We would come to the planning commission for your review and recommendation. And then we would go to the Board of Commissioners seeking land development approval. So, I don't know, there's some
well, in that whole litany and approval process, is there any part of this ordinance that would effectively give you relief from any existing requirement independent requirement
No,
in that laundry list that you've just told?
no, no.
Is there any incidental effect of this that's not immediately apparent?
The issue is that right now, there's a blanket prohibition on drive-throughs in the Wayne Business Overlay District, so we can't apply for a special exception, we can't ask for that. Until the ordinance is amended, then, to make it a use permitted by special exception, then we could ask for that relief. But we're not asking for any other relief from any other provision of the zoning ordinance or the subdivision and land development ordinance or anything like that. We'd have to submit our formal land development plans, get review letters from the staff. They could raise zoning issues, they could raise subdivision and land development issues, whatever issues our plans showed. We're just trying to amend the ordinance so that this special exception is a possibility in this district. That a drive-through for pharmacy only, single lane, meeting all the standards and criteria.
If you needed other zoning relief and had to apply the normal standard,
Right.
showing hardship,
Right.
so on and so forth,
Right.
is there any part of this ordinance that would trump, for the lack of a better term, those requirements?
No, no, there's not. We started out, we actually did go to the zoning hearing board asking for a variance to permit the drive-through by variance in the district. And the zoning hearing board, and there were a number of people here who were at the meeting, thought it was a great idea, expressed support for the idea, but didn't feel on the state of the law that they could grant a variance because there were no unique unnecessary hardship peculiar to this property. And they said, we think you should go to the commissioners and get the ordinance amended to permit this use. And that started us coming in with the ordinance amendment that allowed it by right. And we had a couple of hearings with the commissioners. We got all the way up to the last hearing. And they got a review letter very much similar to this one. And the commissioners, based on that review letter, said we'd like to, the Delaware County Planning Commission's review, we would like to have the use permitted by special exception. And the recommendation was approval the last time, provided the use is permitted by special exception as opposed to by right. And we went into all the differences in traffic generated by banks and fast food restaurants versus pharmacy, which is a very, very minimal type of a use, a very minimal type of a drive-through volume use. We went into all the detail. I have all the facts and figures and statistics here with me on that issue. And they're just totally different animals in terms of the impact. And some of the standards of the Wayne Business Overlay District were to minimize curb cuts. That's what we're proposing to do in this particular application. I think that's the reason why the township in the ordinance put in that you exit onto a street other than Lancaster Avenue. So we'd be eliminating 3 curb cuts in this particular case and getting down to 1 curb cut on Lancaster Avenue.
Another question for Dan. Is there anything that prevents us, they'll come back to us again, so do we have the freedom to put some conditions on the approval? Or who has that ability to make that conditional upon certain things that are?
You're talking about when they come back with their land development application, with
Yeah.
their plan?
Yes.
Certainly, there are things. I mean, I will come up with a list of things where we feel, the staff feels, it does not comply with the subdivision or the zoning code, and present them.
Dan, actually, I didn't ask the question properly, but are there conditions that we have the ability to put conditions on it that would help us more try to preserve what the intent of the Wayne Overlay District is? Not just black and white zoning regulations. For example, exiting off of a side street or reducing of curb cuts, things that not necessarily are in the black and white code, but will we have the freedom or some flexibility to put some conditions on that?
Well, in that example, the proposed ordinance specifically says it's on the corner, so
Right.
that they have a driveway access onto both streets.
But if there's something else that comes up.
I mean, there may be additional landscaping that you may want to require. There could be, additional buffering. It may be something in that direction.
Yeah.
But it may be a situation where the applicant has to agree to it. The code says 3 trees, per 10 parking spaces, and you might want 4 trees. If he doesn't agree to that, we cannot force him to do that.
So we can't really we can't condition the
Like-
special exception.
So let me just paraphrase. So are you suggesting that we make it conditional, your approval of this ordinance is conditioned upon them doing something additional when they come back?
Not now, but when they come back again, since we're granting a special exception, do we have the freedom and flexibility of granting that special exception with certain conditions attached to them?
No.
Okay, so
No.
basically, if we grant this, then pretty much they can do it by right.
Yes.
Well, the-
Assuming they are complying with what they have in here,
Yes.
that the drive-through is on the backside, opposite
Right.
Lancaster, then that is
This is the last look, in essence.
the last look at this
Yeah,
ordinance.
right, yeah.
The zoning hearing board has the authority to attach conditions to the grant of a special exception. When we came in on the land development, Dan's right. I mean, all the time, planning commissions are asking, do this or do that, so we'd like to see you do that, and applicants do it. But if you're concerned on the issue whether we have to put that extra tree in or that sort of thing, in my experience, it's almost impossible to design a site plan for a site like this where you don't require some kind of a waiver from something under the subdivision and land development ordinance. And what typically happens is when a waiver is required, the governing body and the planning commission will say, well, we'd be inclined to give you the waiver if you do this or if you do that. And it happens all the time. I mean, I have no doubt that you'd have opportunity to impose conditions.
When the zoning hearing board hears this matter in your application for a special exception, can it impose conditions other than those enumerated in the ordinance?
It could. It could. The zoning hearing board does have the power to issue or to attach conditions to either the grant of a variance or a special exception. Then it gets a little complicated. There's a whole body of case law on valid conditions and invalid conditions. So it's not, they can't impose any condition, whether it has any reasonable relationship to the public health, safety, or welfare or not, but they can impose reasonable
That
conditions.
was my understanding.
Right.
I had a comment that partially addresses Matt's issues at the last meeting about a possible proliferation of drive-throughs. We're kind of opening the door and weakening the ordinance. I asked Dan for the dimensions of the Wayne Business District, and I think you said it was something like a little over 3,000 feet by 1,000 feet.
That's
And
correct.
In the Delaware County letter that we just got dated March 18th, 2010, on the last page, I believe, just above the paragraph called adoption, it says in one sentence here, in order to promote a walkable landscape, minimum separation distances could be established for drive-through facilities. Perhaps the minimum distance could be 1,000 feet apart, and all of a sudden it would be kind of hard to have more than 3 in the whole district. And that would be something for the group here to consider. Could be 1,500 feet, too.
Thoughts?
My only thought is that if by granting this, we end up with 3 or 4 unintended drive-throughs in Wayne, obviously, we've kind of defeated the purpose of the Wayne overlay district. But as a potential concession or maybe some mutual agreement with the developer or the landowner, would there be any possibility to scale the building appropriately for the corner? So as an example, we don't get a building that maxes out the site, and potentially on the western side of the site allow for some open space or at least some public space where we don't see yet another big box retail drive-through store that we don't know will be in existence or not in 10 years. And specific to Rite Aid, I think there have been some public announcements made about Rite Aid closing stores around the country. It concerns me that we grant this exception, and 8 or 10 years from now, for whatever reason, that store goes dark, and we have to live with it. So I think if there was some way to talk to the applicant or to the landowner about how we could potentially minimize the impact of a large big box store on that site. That would be something that I'd be interested in hearing.
Yeah, sure.
Bob Lynn, architect. I don't know, I believe I've seen most of you several times in this project, but this is actually, I don't know if you've seen this at this point, this is actually the rather firm proposal of the Rite Aid on this site. And one of the things we tried to do is, I love this overhead, is to try to break this into a series of masses so it wasn't a big box. The attempt was to take it and reduce the scale, make it more pedestrian friendly, and a series of rhythmic progressions that you have a store that, although it's the size of a Rite Aid, does not look like it's one giant store. And we did work rather hard on the site planning to keep a fairly substantial portion of the site open. As you know, right now there's a series of curb cuts that run all the way across Lancaster Pike, so we've reduced that to a single curb cut in the spirit of the WBO relative to pedestrian friendly. We've also taken the drive-through traffic, and it doesn't exit directly onto Lancaster Pike. It follows good traffic planning in that, first of all, it's totally masked from the street. You can't see it physically from the street at all. And it exits onto Cromer and comes back out to Lancaster as a collector type situation. So we've actually tried to work within the spirit. I've done quite a few little buildings in Wayne before the WBO was there. And I think this actually captures what you're in some ways trying to do. I don't do big boxes in Radnor. It's not my end.
Well, I have, Matt, this ordinance refers specifically to prescription drugs, does it not?
Yes. Yes.
So if Rite Aid were not there, what right would the owner of that property have to have a drive-through unless it was offering prescription drugs? I guess it could build a big box warehouse type drugstore or a warehouse facility that had a pharmacy. I get it now. Yes. All right. Okay. Well, that leads to my next question. I think I remember seeing these elevations some months ago.
Some years ago, probably.
How far along are you on your development plans that you are going to be presenting to the township?
We are no further along than what you see in front of you, which is a concept site plan as well as the concept image. Because without this particular special exception language, again, applying to the entire district and specifically allowing us to apply it then to our site if the zoning hearing board sees fit, we don't want to go too much farther downstream.
So you have a lot of work to do before you come back for the long laundry list of approvals that your council referred to earlier.
Absolutely. We're not going to pursue that long.
I understand.
Until
I understand.
It's kind of the chicken and the egg scenario we always face in land
I
development
understand.
zoning.
Yes.
Where
Right.
do you start?
Yep.
Excuse me, in that concept plan, do you have any kind of rough numbers of the size of the lot and the size of that building?
Site is 1.12 acres, an acre being 43,560 square feet, so let's say 45,000 for discussion, 46,000. The building is a 14,600 square foot building that's depicted on the site. And again, one of the things we did is we worked to the build-to line, which of course is trying to bring the buildings up to a street scale to create that rhythm. So this is actually designed at the mandated build-to line, which any building, of course, on this site would be. And again, the existing plan, give me 10 seconds and get my ant off my plan. I think it's a Radnor ant. Hang on. You're probably more familiar with the site than anybody, as residents, but the existing plan, of course, has the Blockbuster all the way at the same location on the westerly side, and the former Blockbuster, it's closed down, I understand, and the Taco Bell with its drive-through exit directly onto Lancaster Pike at this location. So these are the same scale. So when you take a look at this plan and you take a look at the new plan, you can basically get the idea of what we were trying to achieve. In fact, I think you'll probably enjoy this a little bit, but this particular plan, which you saw on your screen, is exactly a Drexel Hill Rite Aid we also worked on, exactly the same shape and size, but this is sort of like where it starts and where it goes in order to make it the Radnor Rite Aid. So I think it's a good exhibit to show you where they start.
I have a quick question. The existing Blockbuster on the as-built or whatever that you
Yes.
had there, how many square feet is the Blockbuster?
looks like 10,381,
And how many square feet is the Taco Bell?
2,053, 2053. So the two of them together are somewhere approaching 12,500 square feet,
And how many square feet is the Rite Aid?
14,600.
And what's the maximum that you could possibly build on the site, square footage, based on the zoning,
Well,
as you understand it?
normally, the tail wagging the dog in zoning is parking. So in this particular case, the balance between the parking, and again, this is just one particular application, it's about, this first of all is a standard size Rite Aid. This wasn't tailored for the specific site, but making sure the parking ratio is compliant with the building, and it is.
Now, my question was, how many square feet, regardless of the parking need, what's the maximum structure that you could build on this site, based on the current zoning?
I don't have that off. I don't want to give you a bad answer on that because I'd have to evaluate that building relative to parking, and the parking is unique to different buildings. Yeah, your engineering department may have a better assessment. You're probably in the, you're probably in the 15 to 20,000 square foot maximum. And I don't know what those numbers are without further research.
So it's possible you could build the structure and create a pad and expand down the road if you so desired.
Well, no, this particular Rite Aid and this parking that matches it and the landscape buffering and the build-to-line concept, this is it for this particular site under this application.
But I think Matt's question, which I think remains unanswered, is 10 years down the road or any period of time down the road, you're gone. The ordinance may be so broadly drafted that although it applies to this location, Lancaster Avenue and a side street, that a retailer that has pharmacy as an incidental service could take advantage of this, and we could be left with, let's take an extreme example, a national pawn shop that had decided to have pharmacies. Would that entity be able to move into this site, put a big box on that site, reduce the amount of your parking, and get an entirely different result than what you're showing us here? What you're showing us here is specific to your plan.
Yes.
But Matt's point is the ordinance has broader applicability.
But the ordinance does have architectural controls, and the design review board does as well. And we've designed this to meet those architectural controls with,
Where are the
indentation.
architectural
Isn't this
standards in
the
the
staggered
ordinance?
look here, isn't that outlined in the Wayne Business
It is.
Overlay District?
It requires.
You mean it's in the Wayne business?
Yeah.
It
Oh,
is.
okay.
It is. So you can only have so much of a
And the
frontage
building
without
line.
Okay.
breaking the building.
Well,
And
in fact, I worked with Mac McCoy back when the WBO was first a dream years ago, when we did the Wayne Toy Town, converted it to Domicile and Brouhaha and some of those. We did Margaret Quo's
Okay, so the,
restaurant. But this particular district has some very serious design constraints. Example, you can only have so many linear foot of building facade before you undulate.
Okay.
Some type of rhythm relief that it steps back, steps forward. And then you can actually go to the build-to line and undulate forward and backward from that line. And it's very, very specific what you can do on the ordinance. Again, this is an attempt here to not make it look like a box. And this is the image that Rite Aid has agreed they will, work with on this site should they come to this site, which is a series of structures versus a big mass. That's in the spirit of.
if you think about Wayne, I mean, there are different parts of Wayne, and if you get to the real downtown area, they're all stores in a row. I mean, there's not a lot of open space. That's downtown Wayne, and we actually have more open space. But the idea here was to try to make this look more like that, like a series of stores instead of just one big store. So we're trying to meet the spirit, if not the letter.
And forgive me, but this exact plan, the plan you see here, the image, and this site plan that you saw a minute ago, we can build the site plan by right, regardless of the zoning for the drive-through. The drive-through is the question. In other words, this site plan is zoning compliant. I believe it is. I've checked it. At least we'll confirm that going through the land development process. The parking's compliant, the
you
building's
say
compliant.
you haven't gone through the land development.
No, I'm saying, but this particular plan is designed to be a zoning compliant, a by right type of plan. The problem is the Rite Aid model is such that without the drive-through, they're far less interested, I'm going to use those words carefully, in the site. But the real discussion is whether this exact plan, which again is by right, can or can't have a drive-through. It currently cannot. The idea is therefore there's special exception language. And again, the test of the special exception is in front of the zoning hearing board, and they can attach reasonable conditions. And this drive-through, as proposed, is not visible from the street. It is to the rear of the building. So the image from the WBO and the facade overlay district and everything else is still there. It's just a matter of whether or not it does or doesn't have a drive-through. to the
And
rear.
we don't see any conflict with pedestrian movements by having the drive-through way back there. I mean, no more than you will have with people pulling into any parking lot for any retail use and cars pulling in. Whether they stop and park the car and get out and walk in or go through a drive-through in the back is not going to impact any, not going to have any negative impact on pedestrian crossing, especially back there. There's no pedestrians crossing back there.
But there's a more important facility for the township. That's where we get all of our snow removed.
Right.
That's where that Kroger Lane was closed down
Right.
during snowstorms last winter because you couldn't get through because it was impassable until the township trucks came through.
Well, that's how they come through.
That's
They-
exactly
they-
right.
They come through there.
So it's not a pedestrian way, but it's a very critical way to get township services to where they need to be.
We had Chris Williams from McMahon Associates, was the township's traffic engineer, look at the issue, and he concluded that what we're proposing would have no adverse impact on the operation of the township facilities at all. He testified at great length at the zoning hearing board meeting, and I know I've submitted a couple of times to the township copies of the transcript of his testimony.
And this is just a follow-up question to that. Do you think Chris would agree that if you had a greater setback on the western side of your property, you'd have more room to maneuver vehicles, you'd have more ability to get snow removed out of the way? So
We have increased the setback on the western side.
I'm saying increasing it more.
Bob, I'll let
I can increase it slightly, but within a practical sense, it's not going to be a matter of more than a couple of feet, because in order to develop a legitimate landscape buffer on Aberdeen over on the side, I think this used to show up, it doesn't show up anymore, all right. In order to develop a buffer over in Aberdeen and get legitimate parking to support the building, again, we've pulled the existing Blockbuster store off of Cromer by about a dozen feet from where it currently exists, so there is room there.
So we've increased that setback by about 12 feet from what's currently there at the Blockbuster building.
Correct.
Dan, a question for you. If Taco Bell moved out today, what happens to the drive-through?
That ceases, assuming that it changes use.
So another fast food
Yeah.
could go in there, but nothing else?
Correct.
The bank went in there, it'd be a no.
Correct, it's the use.
If John's National Pawn Shop went in there, they couldn't use it.
Correct.
It only could be fast food. So we could get another fast food user in there as is today, but other than fast food, it would not be permitted.
That is correct.
Okay.
That's exactly correct.
Thank you.
And one of the arguments we made early on was, you can love the Blockbuster and Taco Bell, but we see this as being an improvement on that corner. This is the last property, as you know, in the Wayne Business Overlay District. It's actually the gateway or the start. And one of the things we did is we actually introduced the green pod at the corner of Aberdeen. So the first thing you see is the greenery in front, the lower scale, and then you see the building and the rhythm beginning on the westerly side of the site. So again, Blockbuster, we said we were concerned when we started these hearings. Blockbuster was thinking of closing down. Apparently that has happened. Drive-throughs are going to be such a premium in Wayne, frankly. I can't imagine that not converting to another fast food if it goes, because it's one of the only locations you can still do it by right. So I suspect a drive-through will always be on this site. The question is which drive-through.
I had a comment about number 5 on the actual ordinance. Because, you know what you said about this building, I mean, everything about the picture and the design, it's kind of irrelevant. It's just whether or not there's going to be a drive-through, could be a drive-through on the back. Number 5, the egress from the drive-through shall be to a street other than Lancaster Avenue unless there is no other alternative due to physical limitations. And it's that last part of the sentence. I feel like, given that one of my concerns is that we're opening the door to other things, that last part of the line further allows that. I don't understand why we wouldn't just leave it as the egress from a drive-through shall be to a street other than Lancaster Avenue, period.
Yeah, I mean, that specific language, unless there are no other alternative due to physical limitations, was the solicitor's language. But you're free to make whatever recommendation.
And Dan, was there a reason that we put that? I mean, there's probably a balance between being overly restrictive and this, that, and the other thing, but it feels like we set ourselves up to have to, if another applicant were to come in down at Anthropology or down at Wawa, you know, that they would be making a case that why they have to be able to egress onto Lancaster Avenue. And we're opening that door for them right in this language.
I guess the only thing I could think of, the only example that, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Dan?
Well, I was going to say, I think you'd want to look at each site and look at it under its own merits and not be stuck with language that locks you in, it may make more sense to come out onto the side street or to Lancaster Avenue, depending on that other location.
But then that's further counter to the Wayne overlay, right? I mean, the goals of it. Okay.
I'm just thinking theoretically, and this probably doesn't exist anywhere in that area, but suppose that the only street that you had where you could go out onto, other than Lancaster Avenue, was a one-way street in the wrong direction. Maybe that's the kind of thing he's thinking about. I don't know.
Or suppose it's just, there's no side street. I mean,
Right.
if you're in line,
Right.
you have to go on Lancaster. So that would, if you drop that egress onto Lancaster, if you drop that language, then you would be limiting it to only corner locations, which might not be a bad
But
thing.
no, but number one
That's-
says that the
it
property
does.
has to have frontage on Lancaster Avenue and at least
and a
one
side
street in
street,
addition
right,
to
yeah,
Lancaster.
right. I forgot
So-
about that one.
So then the point is, if we're going to do this, do we want to make it so that they can't be creating a curb cut and coming out onto Lancaster, which is, I feel like the most counter to the purpose of the Wayne overlay. That's my only thought with that, with the number 5.
Well, let me just throw this. I mean, it may make sense for, let's just pick another location, Anthropology, where the side street is an unsignalized intersection. So you may not want them coming out onto an unsignalized intersection where North Aberdeen is signalized, and it's better for them to come out.
Well, interesting you say that, because that was actually one of the other comments of, from the county planning letter, is that they say as an added condition, perhaps we should require the intersection on Lancaster, which would mean Kroger, to be signalized to safely permit controlled turning options for ingress and egress. So, I mean, we talked about this last month because there isn't a signal there at Cromer. We all know that it's not a highly used street, although people go in for whatever that restaurant is there.
Cosi.
And it's tight back there, But in any event, Delaware County is actually suggesting we consider putting a light at Lancaster. Is that something that, no, we don't have to, but I'm saying.
Another light on Lancaster.
No, I
don't
didn't
think that-
say that I think we should. What I'm saying is that Delaware County Planning Commission they really were pretty clear that it's not at all in keeping with our overlay.
But for example, 90% plus of your traffic will still come out of this particular site at the main two-way driveway, and 10% or less of the traffic will exit at the Cromer's Lane exit, if you will. So we're certainly not going to put a signalized intersection at the main exit, which is just a normal shopping center in and out. Your idea, however, of saying separation distance of 1,000 feet or something between them certainly gives you some control on limiting the number of places that would occur. I mean, that makes some sense on limitations as well. I like that one. No competition for 1,000 feet.
Yeah, here's just a kind of follow-on question. I mean, you're going to take this through land development, so there's going to be plenty of time for discussing how the building sits on the site and other architectural features and so forth. But the one thing I have a great deal of concern about with this particular location is that it is very accessible not only to the parish across the street, but also to other restaurants, and it doesn't really lend itself, at least in the current plan that I'm seeing, to have any particular open space. I mean, I know we don't do that in Radnor, and I know that's typically done in places like New York where there's high density, but I think if we have anything to work with here, it might be the size of the building envelope. And I know you're restricted by parking and you have to have your drive-through, but it would certainly seem right to me to size the building so you provide for some additional areas to congregate where kids get their snow cones, or people coming across this, from church have a place to sit. Because that's the only thing that I see that's kind of missing from this plan. I concur, you did a nice job designing it for the site, but you really haven't given us much more than 14,000 square feet is about all we can work with.
Yeah, one of the difficulties in the WBO, and we're actually wrestling with this in Media Borough right now, we have a new called Traditional Neighborhood Overlay District on Baltimore Pike. And we have established a new build-to line. In fact, I'm doing the first 2 projects down there. And by the way, I'm 17 years in another Providence Planning Commission, so I sympathize with your role sitting on that side of the table. I know what it's like sitting over there. In fact, our meeting was canceled tonight. We were lucky. But the problem with the WBO and any build-to line is you do move the buildings to the street. And it's conscious. There's a reason for that. You're trying to create that city scale. So the opportunity to do some things in front of buildings, which we used to have by pulling the building back, are gone. And in fact, the WBO, the intention is not to have the green space in front of it, but instead somewhere else, because you're trying to create that cityscape, that rhythm of buildings. It's always it's a tough balancing act.
Oh, it is. But if you reduce the footprint by 2 or 2,500 square feet, then you have some area to give what could be a little bit more buffer to what is a big building on Lancaster Avenue.
It's something I can discuss, but obviously I, as the
Yeah.
architect for Rite Aid, can't promise
Of course,
anything as I
of
go
course.
into
That
land
we're
development.
just thinking about ways to hopefully make this a little more.
I understand. We started out with CVSs. They were 9,000 feet. Now, don't ever see a 9,000-foot CVS. These stores have progressively gone to 9,600 and 11 and 12, and there's ones bigger than 14.6 as well. They're getting larger, as you know.
I have one
Go ahead, John.
carryover question from Matt. Is this ordinance intended to apply only to establishments that are primarily in the drugstore business? Or would it apply to a supermarket that had a prescription pharmacy in it?
I suppose,
Dan, do you know?
It talks about prescription medicine
Right.
window.
Right.
So
So a
Theoretically-
supermarket that had a pharmacy could take advantage of it?
that's the way I see it.
it could. I think a supermarket would have a very difficult time finding any property in the Wayne Business Overlay.
Well, that may be true,
Yeah,
but I'm
yeah.
just trying to,
Yeah. I mean, those things are, what, 58, 60,000 square feet these days,
Yeah.
Bob, the
Yeah,
supermarkets? You need, that'd be the whole district.
You guys do a great job of rationalizing scale, but you know what? It's really just a matter of what you can fit and develop on the site. It's not because it has to be 60,000 square feet. It's because that local ordinance and those local zoning rules allow for it.
Well, the supermarkets that I've dealt with have their own, and I just threw that number out, some of them are a little bit less than that, but they have their own standards for what they want, and they won't.
well, it is probably true that that any supermarket with a pharmacy in it is going to be a larger supermarket.
Right, right.
It's not going to be I can't imagine a Whole Foods type supermarket having a pharmacy. But the question was, is it intended to apply only to, for the lack of a better term, drugstores or other establishments? And I think the consensus is it would apply to any establishment that had a pharmacy.
I think that's correct.
And the transactions are limited to drugs. That was,
Pardon me?
transactions are limited strictly to drugs. That was very clear in the ordinance as well. Can't be selling cotton swabs or something
No,
else.
what you're selling out of the window, you
Correct.
mean? Yes.
Correct.
Any other comment up here? Thanks, guys. Any public comment? John?
Good evening. My name is John Simon, and if I may, let me, as one of the people who got us to this point, fill in some of the blanks. I was one of the 9 who drew the comprehensive plan, and actually, at the point it needed to be approved by the Planning Commission and the supervisors, I was chair of the Planning Commission to oversee that. And in fact, the commissioners kept me on almost 6 months after my term should have expired so that the comprehensive plan could be adopted in a smooth and orderly manner. I then became one of the 9 on the Comprehensive Plan Implementation Committee and actually chaired it for the first almost 5 years. When we dealt with the Wayne Business Overlay District, one of the things that was foremost on our minds was eliminating drive-ins and drive-throughs for all the obvious reasons. And it frankly never occurred to any of us that we would be here talking about a high-end pharmacy who, in their present corporate planning, feels that it is necessary to provide a drive-through window where a very sick person or a mother with a very sick child does not have to get out of their car in the snow or the rain even, and can pick up a prescription that had been ordered and is ready for them. So the transaction is as simple as one person handing in the money and the other person handing over the prescription. This particular plan, it seems to me, does a lot of other things. It eliminates 3 curb cuts, and thus the access around that corner. Further, it eliminates one of the few existing fast food restaurants within the district. We, as a committee, Comprehensive Plan Implementation Committee, unanimously support this application and hope that you would understand that what is proposed by this owner-developer is an important first step in improving the business district. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have, but I would ask that you give this your support.
Thank you, John. Any questions for John? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Sir?
Hi, Baron Gemmer. I live on South Wayne. My wife and I own a property less than a block from the WBOD. I'll try and be brief. I thank you for tabling last meeting. I wasn't able to make it, and I do have some points I'd like to address. First off, as I've mentioned to the Board of Commissioners when this was back up before, as much as you can, and I know it's hard given a development plan here, please consider this independent of any plan and looking at the district itself. Now, with that said, I know a lot of the plan is out there, so I'm going to address some issues with areas with the plan, but please think about the WB as a whole and what could happen anywhere with this, and I'll have a map later to talk about that. I want to read something very quickly from a sentence from the Garrett Hill zoning district that came from Delaware County Planning in their comment section, which came back similar to the one that you just got on the 18th of March. As stated previously, the township is to be commended for prohibiting drive-through associated uses within the Garrett Hill zoning district, as they are counterproductive to a compact, pedestrian-friendly townscape. And then if you go on to if anybody doesn't have a copy of the Delaware County one, I'd be happy to provide you one, but the one that just came back from Delaware County about this talks about drive-through lanes are typically prohibited in neighborhood, commercial, and compact pedestrian-oriented townscape districts. So as Susan has said, this seems basically saying even though they're making some recommendations, it's going against this, because that last sentence says, consequently, the proposed petition to permit prescription-only drive-throughs is not consistent with the goals and objectives of the Wayne Business Overlay District Master Plan or Comprehensive Plan. And to talk about what they recommended there are 2 things they suggested considering. They said you should consider the maximum lot width, and not so much for the big box per se, with architectural offsets, because that's always built in, but it's because of the whole walkability. This lot is 350 plus feet if you're going to combine these two, and that just makes people park, get back in their car, and drive again, not walk. Architectural offsets do not affect that. So drive-throughs tend to, as the Delaware County says, tend to produce bigger lots, and then it just reduces the walkability, not based upon curb cuts and not based upon architectural offsets. The second thing they recommended considering, and I appreciate that that's been brought up already, is minimum distance between drive-throughs, should you decide to recommend this passage with perhaps some additional conditions. What I would suggest, if you go that route, and I'm not suggesting you go that route, but if you do, that it be a minimum distance between any drive-through, not just pharmacy drive-throughs, because there's grandfathered drive-throughs in the WBOD, and furthermore, not limit it that the drive-through has to be in the WBOD. Just say that the property where it's being built has to be 500 or 1,000 feet from any other drive-through. Perhaps you want to ratchet it down if you're going to expand that, but matter of fact, that was actually brought up at Delaware County. They were suggesting that 500 number exactly. The third thing they're saying is actually not even asking you to consider. They're saying you should, or the township, excuse me, not the planning commission, you as the township should add this additional criteria, which kind of obviates some of the questions that were arising regarding the ingress and egress. This says that the ingress and egress need to be on the side street, not on Lancaster, and that street needs to be signalized. So it wasn't implying that Cromer Road should be signalized. It's implying that properties, this would only apply to properties that already have that in fact there, whether it's a corner property where the side street that they abut is already signalized. So I think that's very important. They're actually already saying that, and I'll show you a map in a bit that shows you the properties where that will really affect. The other thing, too, that this all ties into is actually tomorrow night, as you see the signs out there, there's a big Route 30 corridor discussion in terms of the walkability and what should be happening on Lancaster. It's unfortunately the timing's not as good for you on that. Quickly also, talking about the need, it's already been talked about what happens if you need non-prescription things, et cetera, and somewhat of a slippery slope that could open up for beyond this, because obviously this is very specific. But just to talk about the need, within the three major pharmacy chains, Walgreens, Rite Aids, and CVS, if you take a over 5+ radius around the WBOD, so it's roughly probably over 100 square miles, there are 15 of those chain buildings in there. One of those three make up 15. I have the numbers there. Of those 15, within 100 square miles of the WBOD, one of those 15 has a drive-through, and that is on 202 in King of Prussia. So if there was an overriding need with some of this, you think it would have been fulfilled in some ways. Additionally, within that same radius, there are actually at least 3, and probably more, delivery pharmacies that offer same-day delivery, which is actually much more useful for folks that can't even get out and drive. If someone's alone and has a migraine, or they're elderly and can't drive to begin with and can't get somebody to either take them or pick things up. There obviously are alternate delivery methods that have already been talked about. And that also brings up, the 1 out of 15 brings up the traffic issue, because when they were talking about the national fast food statistics for drive-throughs, and then for pharmacy drive-throughs, the claim was that there was no national statistics available. So they used a Rite Aid in Westchester and used it one day, 9 hours, which to me is not statistically significant, but so be it. Well, the issue with that is, in Westchester, there are 7 drive-through pharmacies in Westchester alone. So the demand is being spread around there. If a drive-through comes to Wayne, where there's not one within 5 miles of any direction, you might see whatever demand there's going to be, people switching to use that for whatever reason. So some of the traffic that you've seen is not going to be as accurate. It's going to probably be much higher. The other thing that is not, one of the other things that you might consider if you decide to go the special exception route is, although it talks about being pedestrian friendly here, it doesn't talk about having to eliminate or maintain the same number of curb cuts. That's not part of the special exception, and that's obviously an important thing. Let me just, I just want to hand this one thing out here to you. I don't know if that can be gotten on, if you can zoom really far in, but audience at home may not get the advantage of it. But if you're looking at it, what I wanted to show is it's the outline, the hard black outline is the WBOD. And there's approximately, I think, 160 to 170 properties in there. Thank you very much for that. Of the properties in there, the ones highlighted in green are the ones that would conform to conditions 1 and condition 6, being a corner property and would be big enough to allow at least stacking for 3 vehicles. So that limits it down tremendously. If you look at the properties that stand a realistic chance of development, those are the ones with an orange dot on them, because I'll tell you the ones that are being eliminated. This right here is that's St. Mary's, right? St. Catherine, sorry, there's St. Mary's. There's the Wayne Hotel. There's the AT&T lot, which we almost supports the parking on North Wayne through the much talked about trade. And there's, I'll just talk about, there's the commercial with apartments, there's the Wawa, and there's Anthropology, and they're the two the parcels in question here. If you add in I won't even call it a suggestion, the condition that Delaware County says to add to this, which is that the side street must be signalized, you're down to only the properties that are circled with the black there. So the existing Taco Bell, the Wawa, and the commercial district there with the apartments in it. I think Matt mentioned last time too, when it was by right, that he thought it was somewhat of a backdoor spot zoning, and this is almost kind of a side door because there's just so few properties this would apply to in this sense. But also back to the grocery store analogy, there's nothing to prevent if drugs become so lucrative for Wawa, if they were able to get a little more land or be willing to give up some of theirs to put in a drive-through there. And that could obviously increase that, not only because of the additional use in addition to the Wawa, but obviously, again, if there's any pent-up demand for a drive-through, because people like convenience, whether it's needed because a sick child's sick, people like to use drive-throughs, and they may switch prescriptions just to go there. So I just want you to keep that in mind, that as the Delaware County planning sees this, only realistically, out of 160, or 2% or less of all properties in the WBOD would be affected like this. The last thing I just want to address then is obviously some comments have been made, I know it was worded carefully today, about whether or not, if they don't get a drive-through, would Rite Aid build here, or would they, they're already in the WBOD, would they leave? And I just want to cite 5 examples very quickly in terms of similar situations that have arisen. This is Sunnyvale, California in 2009 for their planning commission. This is Rite Aid talking to the planning commission. He said if the commission eliminates the second drive-through lane, the project would be sent back to the corporate real estate committee, and the project would be in jeopardy of being denied, not pursued. So there they were. It's all how much they can get. They wanted 2, and they said if you don't give us 2 and only give us 1, we're going to walk away. In Northampton, PA, in 2009, this is actually an appeal where Rite Aid lost, and the judge basically says the testimony relates not to an economic hardship caused by the conditions of the site, but instead to an impact caused by requirements imposed by the Rite Aid over the construction of its pharmacies. 3 more. Wyomissing Borough, 2007. This is where the county borough, that plan, the Rite Aid has now purchased all their drugstores. They still want to open up this store as a previous approved location, but without the drive-through window, and one existed there at the time. Bristol Township here in Pennsylvania, November 2008, to construct a Rite Aid and a bank, and they were proposing to construct the bank with a drive-through, but not the Rite Aid. And then finally, just less than a year ago, May of 2009 in Altadena, California. This is also Rite Aid. This applicant thinks the county public hearing for this case should be scheduled in about 3 months, and the building could open somewhere between July to November 2010. The project is now in plan and will start construction earlier this year. There will be no drive-through for the Rite Aid. So Rite Aid's already in the WBOD. I don't think that, hopefully there's not a question about them leaving Wayne in general or the area. And again, I think this just shows they obviously want what their master plan is, which normally would probably include 2 or more drive-throughs. Hopefully I've shown that it will have some more of an impact than we've all thought based upon some of the traffic things. So my hope for you is to turn this down. If you see fit that you need to do the special exception, then I would ask that you incorporate the Delaware County planning where the side street, it must be ingress and egress through a side street and be signalized, and furthermore, add some minimum distance between any drive-through created under this ordinance and all other drive-throughs. So, thank you very much.
Let me ask you about the specific application of that requirement. This egress is onto that small street that goes back to the township building, right?
Correct.
Are you suggesting that this would not be permitted unless there was a traffic light at that?
Actually, for this particular lot, it would still be permitted because it also borders Aberdeen, which has a light.
Is that how you read it?
Yes. If they
So
put
the egress does not have to be on the signalized side street?
No, this actually, whatever you would like to do. What Delaware, I talked to Dennis DeRosa about his review. He is saying that both the ingress and egress should be on the signalized side street. That's what that.
So if what he is saying is that there should be a traffic light.
You're confusing they didn't look at the development plan. He's basically saying these are the types of parcels, and because of traffic patterns, this is what should exist. So if you were to put one here, yes, you could either decide to put a traffic light on Cromer.
Or have it exit onto Aberdeen.
Yeah, Aberdeen. But again, they did actually not even get the development plan. They're looking at this much more broad. They knew of the existence of it, but they're considering hopefully the way that it actually should be considered in light of what the actual change to the zoning is. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment?
Good evening. Welcome to the new members of the board. My name is Jim Schneller. I live 1.5 blocks from the location, and I attend church across the street and otherwise shop there at least 5 days a week. And I've been before the commission before, and I've expressed a lot of concern. And I just wanted to highlight some things and some new points. I'd like to open by being very wary of the fact that so much specific data is coming in regarding this particular corner. I know that it was very interesting that Mr. Gemmer's analysis shows there's not that many spots, but it still resembles almost a special interest type of legislation, and I think it's alarming. And frankly, the township, in that respect, the township may be opening itself. I'm not an expert, but it's opening yourselves to challenges, for instance, from a food store, because of that pharmacy restriction. And I think that because you've permitted so much of that discussion, that the fact that it's already originated by a particular merchant, this all compounds itself into quite a mass of special attention being given to someone. And frankly, my second point is that we've seen no real showing of why this idea, or any idea of this nature, that the statute would delineate is necessary, and why the master plan should be circumvented. All we've really seen is a couple of particulars about traffic and people who were sick. And there's been no impetus shown for why this undertaking should happen. And I object to the fact that it's even taken so much time to the township's commissions at this point. And I walked in here really wanting to ask someone if someone can resolve the fact about Cromer. Has someone taken a look at Cromer Ave as far as its existence? Has it been a private driveway? At one point, when the township built its maintenance garages, did it become a quasi-public way? And would this lend the township to some sort of action by an unpleased party at some point? That was my major point at the last time. I missed the last meeting also, but the prior meeting I tried to make the impression that our master plan for the Wayne Business Office, for the Wayne Business Overlay, suggests a mid-block pedestrian walkway right where Cromer is. They say some point in the future when the shopping flavor district moves through our efforts down the pike towards Aberdeen, it would be very nice to have a crosswalk. Well, all we're doing here is encouraging a busy traffic corner where that crosswalk would be. And a sixth point I'd like to make is the very fact that because this property has three different sides, it's a peculiar property, but it's a peculiar situation. Why should the landowner, with all respect to the landowner, and I really don't want to seem nitpicking, but you have the convenience of a three-sided lot, but I think you should still only have the choice of having cuts on two of those sides in the interest of the overlay. Regardless of that, I don't want it to seem like I'm moving into this. The Aberdeen entrance is nightmarish. I know that people going left into Taco Bell right now can really block up people coming from the Pike or coming from South Wayne, and with additional traffic who apparently can access the parking lot in addition to the drive-through, that could be a potential problem. The overlay district really has pedestrian comfort in mind, and you have the beginnings. You have a seed there because there's always been a burgeoning or a wish to improve the Aberdeen pedestrian situation. You have a neighborhood back there which is not limited to Little Chicago. You have people who walk and jog from North Wayne and from the St. David's district. And they're just waiting for things to improve. You have park and shop, and that's what I think you should be concentrating on. And this isn't a park and shop situation. This is even encouraging to drive and shop and drive and shop. In addition, speaking of that crosswalk that the master plan is hopeful about, you have a realistic problem across the street because what you have is the auto body paint, a couple of small shops, Joe's, and that block is much less likely of any kind of comprehensive development that might lend itself to the district flavor. So we are looking at the block. This is possibly the fulcrum development on that block of East Lancaster, and I hope you'll be very careful about it. Also, and I saved this for last, I had the pleasure of attending one of the Delaware County Planning Commission meetings, and I have to say that although their letter seems stringent, even that letter resulted from a situation where the entire commission was either silent or opposed to a liberal viewpoint that was being given by two members, one of them the chair, and one of them a member on one of our other boards. So I believe that otherwise the Delco Planning Commission would have been even more stringent. I also would take issue with the fact that the zoning hearing board's comments or the board's comments at previous instances of this matter shouldn't have any relation whatsoever. And if I could just reiterate the fact that pedestrian traffic has a great chance here to grow, and for this block to be more of a North Wayne type block. I think any example of Drexel Hill, for instance, Drexel Hill is Route 1, or Old Baltimore Pike, and we're talking about a street that can't be altered much in flavor. But we have the amazing situation here where even today Lancaster Avenue is the country's original turnpike in some ways, and it's quaint, and I think we have to work on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Yes, sir.
Just got. My name is Chuck Barber. I live at 228 Hilldale Road, Villanova. I've served 8 years on the Planning Commission, 3 of them as chairman. And I was chairman when we put in the land use plan before John had a chance to put his in somewhat later. I've also been president for 7 years of the Ashwood Manor Civic Association, and I've been a committee man for the past 14 years. This, I think, is my 10th or 11th visit, so I feel like I'm a bit redundant. The first time I spoke was in October of '08 to the Zoning Hearing Board, which I knew all the members, and I've been in the township 30 years. I have 3 children, the youngest. They're all in their 30s. They all live or work in Radnor. I'm blessed. When this process started, I used to have a mother-in-law that lived here, but 19 months is a long time. And I used to not have a cast on my foot, so that I'd sure like to be able to drive to a pharmacy, but I guess there are those that would like me to drive down to Route 202 so that I could use their pharmacy, but that's probably not what I'm going to do. I look at ordinances as something that we write for us, and the question that we have to determine is whether at some point had someone in the stages of developing the business overlay district said, well, what about pharmacies? Maybe John could address that, but my guess is that they probably would have written this in, because I don't think it was the intention of anyone to exclude pharmacies from the Wayne Business Overlay District, and there are no new pharmacies, to my knowledge, based on other hearings that I've been at over the past 18, 19 months, that would indicate that Rite Aid is going to build any new facilities that is other than having drive-throughs. And probably, if you are a business person, and hopefully they are filled with business people, you're going to try to maximize your profits, and you're not going to use an old business model when the new business model has a drive-through. So we in my approach then are looking at, do we want to have Taco Bell and Mattress Giant as being our gateway into the city, or do we want to have something that's new, that's been put up, that's been designed, that's had this group's review, that is permitted and allows my grandchildren, 2 of which live in this township, when their mother would like to drive to get prescriptions for them in the snow, rain, or when they're deathly sick, she doesn't have to take them out of her car and drag them in through a store. I think in other sessions we talked about when you have H1N1, wouldn't it be nice not to have to go inside the store? And other people have testified that they just avoid going to drugstores unless they have to pick up drugs because of those problems. When we talk about walkability, I think when you have a child, a sick senior, or you yourself are sick, you'd like to get your drugs quickly, and I don't think it's a question of, gee, I think it would be great so I can walk to the drugstore. I think what you really want to do is get serviced and get out of there. As far as making changes to ordinances, we have something called the Constitution. Immediately after it's being signed, the Bill of Rights came out, which added 10 exceptions. Subsequently, over the past 200 plus years, we've had amendments 11 to 27. So I think that if the federal government and if the U.S. Constitution is not a perfect, probably the Wayne Business Overlay District isn't either. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Don, final comments? Or?
Can I just make a
Sure.
real quick follow-up comments? I had a bunch of them. I'm not going to go over all of them. Spur you folks a little bit, but just a couple of things. I think that the area that we're talking about, Lancaster Avenue, the center of Wayne, is a lot different than Garrett Hill. I mean, I don't have to tell you, you people are familiar with Garrett Hill. This is Lancaster Avenue, a major state highway going through the town. It's a great town, but it's very different. One thing, when Mr. Gemmer was up here, he mentioned that we took the counts at a Rite Aid in Westchester, and that's incorrect. It was a Rite Aid in Media. So I don't know anything about all those other drive-throughs in Westchester, but Bob Lynn's office did the counts. We have copies of them here. It clearly was the Media Rite Aid. It was a Rite Aid that did a much larger prescription business than the Rite Aid in Wayne does. It was a very fair comparison, and over a 9-hour period, there were a total of 30 trips, or not even 30 trips, 30 vehicles in a 9-hour period, which is half that in trips. There were 24 pickups of prescription and 6 drop-offs, which comes out to, I mean, it's negligible. We quoted the figures on the fast food restaurant. It's like $55 an hour. The Taco Bell does a little bit less than that. It was in the $20 an hour at the peak hour. The bank was $35 an hour, way more than what we're talking about. We're literally talking about a couple of trips an hour. And basically, if you divide the 30, counting all the trips, and divide it by 9 hours, you've got 3-point-something trips per hour. So it's totally de minimis. The Delaware County Planning Commission, this isn't the first time that they reviewed the ordinance which would allow a pharmacy drive-through in the Wayne Business Overlay District. They reviewed it on October 15th, 2009, and some of these comments that are showing up in this latest review I didn't see in that particular review letter. Their recommendation at that time was approval contingent upon the use of a prescription drive-through being permitted by special exception, subject to criteria to minimize impact. And that's what we did, and that's what the township did in drafting this ordinance. They made it by special exception, and they put in criteria to minimize impact. And I don't disagree that it's sort of a strange review letter, Delaware County Planning Commission's review. You read the letter, and it doesn't really match up. But nevertheless, the recommendation in this review letter is approval contingent upon incorporating the following remarks, some of which couldn't possibly be incorporated because they're just observations. I think what you're looking at is a difference between one reviewer. If you're familiar at all with the way the Delaware County Planning Commission works, it gets assigned to a reviewer does a review, and then it goes to the Planning Commission, and they either vote to approve it or disapprove it. And so the Commission voted to recommend approval of the ordinance twice now, or the concept of a drive-through. And obviously the reviewer had some issues with it. And it's all about this walkability and so forth. And I really fail to see how having a drive-through at the rear of a pharmacy is going to impact walkability at all. In his initial review letter, he said you need wider drive aisles and you need more pavement to do this. And that's not true at all. We've got a single-lane drive-through with a bypass lane. It takes up very, very little room. And it's open space, which otherwise could be used for either parking or could be used for additional building. So, we've batted this around pretty good. You've been very patient. You've heard it a couple of times. I think you've read everything that there is to read, and we're just very respectfully asking for your recommendation of enactment of the ordinance, which I still believe is the township's ordinance. We may have been the catalyst that got this moving forward. At one of the meetings I appeared before the implementation committee was going to go ahead and recommend that the township enact the ordinance. After I talked to the then manager and the staff, they felt that they wanted me to get the ball rolling and frankly pay the cost of doing it, and we were more than happy to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Any discussion? Final comments?
We did talk last month about adding in a restriction that prescriptions couldn't be, the drive-through would have to close at a certain hour. And as I recall the conversation, Rite Aid per se doesn't have a 24-hour pharmacy, but not knowing who else might come in to use this special exception, would we want to consider putting in the restriction, because several pharmacies are 24-hour? And, do we want, maybe we do, maybe we don't. But we talked about that last month, and I don't see that in here. And we didn't vote on it, but we did talk about that.
What would your concern be about a late night pharmacy pickup?
Well, the only thing that comes to mind, and it's a slippery slope, because we should be looking at this ordinance from a conceptual level. But when there's a plan before you, it's hard to not put that picture in your mind. But I consider things like, would another applicant have a brightly lit drive-through, overhang, awning, what have you, that might impact neighbors on a different block, that then if that were open later into the evening or all night, the lighting could be an issue. And lighting's not addressed in this either, this ordinance. So, again, maybe all those issues get dealt with at the land development, and lighting is taken care of in Wayne overlay. I don't remember reading specifics about the timing of lighting and things like that in the Wayne overlay. So maybe those will all get taken care of outside of the special exception, but I was just trying to think of other things that might come up from a different applicant, because we should be looking at this more globally, not just with the Rite Aid in mind.
I guess the only thing that I would say is if we do vote to approve it and go forward with the change of ordinance, to measure or to somehow balance the desire of Rite Aid to have a drive-through, which has certainly been well debated, discussed, it would be nice to have a corresponding benefit to the community, which might include something like a bike rack with some seats and maybe a common area where people could sit, so it's not all about what Rite Aid needs, it's maybe about what the business overlay district was intended for. So it would be somewhat of a compromise, but it may mean that you can't build 14,400 square feet. That would be my only consideration.
Skip.
And I wanted to return to my comment from before that one of the ways to protect the walkability of the business district is to establish some minimum distance between drive-throughs. Now, I don't know if we could do it for existing drive-throughs. I think possibly the Bank of America is too close to this. But maybe for all new drive-through uses, maybe 1,000 feet, maybe not within 1,500 feet.
Of any type, you're saying, Skip?
Of
Regardless
any-
of the business.
Of any
bank.
identical use, Because I don't think, because
But in what way do you think that a pharmacy drive-through is going to impact pedestrians?
I don't, I'm trying to address some of the community's concern as well as members of the board. I don't think that this type of drive-through, limited as it is, has that much of an impact, personally.
Okay. Any other comments? Would anyone like to make a motion either to approve or deny, with or without contingencies?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve it without contingencies. I think that, I thought about the distance between uses, and partly from looking at Mr. Gemmer's map, I don't think it's necessary. I don't think there are enough opportunities for this use that it's an issue. I'm not opposed to it. I don't think it's going to come into play, and I think that it might limit the opportunity from 3, long-range scenario to 2, which I don't think is really a reasonable act. That was the only other comment I had.
I'll second that motion.
So I have a motion and a second to approve as presented. All in favor, raise your right hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes, 1 no. The motion carries. Thank you very much. Next on our agenda, SD 2009 D6, final plan of Agnes Irwin to construct an additional replacement of athletic and dining facilities at the Middle Upper School, construction, additional parking, and stormwater management facilities at 295 South Ifton Avenue. Dan, you want to give us the background, the update? I know we've seen this several times before. I'll give the floor to you.
This is the Agnes Irwin site. This is the first time you're seeing it as a final plan. This was approved recently by you and by the Board of Commissioners as a preliminary plan. It is back as required under the Township's ordinance and the municipality's planning code. Just to give you a background where things are located, we have Ethan Avenue running across the top of the plan on the north side of the property. Conestoga Road runs down the side. We have residential that also faces Conestoga Road. Browning Lane is up here to the east. What we have done here is shown in yellow the existing buildings on the property. Orange shows the existing parking. The pinkish color shows proposed parking. The green shows where the new building is going to go. There is a little bit of yellow kind of mixed in here. This is a portion of the building that will be removed and be reconstructed. It's a gymnasium and an addition to their cafeteria located here. We're also changing the location of the tennis courts. They're in the back and they're being turned slightly and relocated just a little bit. There were 19 comments from the Subdivision Advisory Committee. I think a lot of them are pretty self-explanatory. I know that there was a comment that came to me via an email about the construction entrance. That is shown to be in this location. One of my comments is that I'm looking for the applicant to confirm if that is the right location. It seems to me a construction entrance over here on Ethan Avenue may make a little more sense. When I spoke to Agnes Irwin's engineer last week, he agreed that they probably would end up having two construction entrances. Reason I'm bringing that up is the concern that was expressed was the previous work that was done at the school, they built a construction entrance on Conestoga Road, so that is not going to happen. There is a Shade Tree Commission site visit scheduled for later this week, so I will be getting some comments from the Shade Tree on that walkthrough. I also had there was some information in the plans that did not show the proper number of trees being removed or being replaced. And then there were some comments about going to design review and getting a certain number of permits from DEP for stream enclosure, planning modules, many of which have been applied for but have not been received yet. So I'm not sure if there's any specific questions from the board that you'd like me to address, or if you want to talk to the applicant.
Has anything changed since we've seen this the last time?
No, it's what has been submitted is a little more detail, but the building, parking, driveway accesses are all identical to what was shown originally.
Dan, did the flood lines change? Did you get that email?
The flood lines are not shown. These have been eliminated. According to FEMA maps, there are no floodplains on this property.
They moved.
That's
Okay.
right.
Dan, have they been through to Shade Tree yet, or are they still?
They went to Shade Tree. Shade Tree wants to do a site visit. And
Okay.
I believe that's the 9th?
That's this Friday.
This Friday.
So then they'd have to reappear before Shade Tree.
Well, Shade Tree may agree with what they had discussed at the meeting, or they may want them to come back. I'm not exactly sure what Shade Tree plans on doing.
Dan, do you know if the neighbors to the south of the location proposed for the tennis courts have expressed any concerns at any of the board meetings?
I got an email from the person who lives in the Stack house. That was recently sold, and they just moved in, so they were not really up to speed on what was going on. And next door, Agnes Irwin owns, and there's a tennis court on that property. I'm sure the applicant has had meetings with the neighbors that he can fill you in on, but I've heard from no one else.
Thank you.
Dan, are the tennis courts supposed to be lit?
There's no proposal. That's one of my comments is that.
Yeah, the lighting plan number 15, right. So no lights on the tennis courts. Got it. Okay.
Any other questions for Dan? If not, I have applicant come to the podium and you can address the 19 issues,
Yep.
Nick, or just tell us which ones
Sure.
you have objection with.
Good evening, Nicholas Cornelia, representing Agnes Irwin School. There are no lights, I'll make that representation. There are no lights on those tennis courts, proposed, planned, whatever. Yeah, those tennis courts have been there, they've never been lit, and there's no intent to light them. We have had I know, a meeting with the neighbors prior to going to the zoning hearing board for a special exception that we required. And at all the hearings, there hasn't been any opposition to the plans at all. The ones that I want to direct attention to, which I think are the ones that are probably need some resolution, are 6, 7, and 9 deal with the shade tree items. And we are having an on-site visit from Shade Tree, and obviously we'll comply with whatever Shade Tree recommends. So I think that covers 6, 7, and 9. And the only other one was 15, the lighting plan. There was no lighting plan indicated here. Currently, there is no lighting on the parking. If there's going to be lighting, it's going to be from the buildings. There may be at some point, Dan, maybe a standard that would have to go up, you know, if we're unable to extend the lighting from the building at some point, then I guess we would present that to you if the time came, if that was required. But right now, there's no intent to light. And I think everything else we will comply with.
Nick, real quick, it's 16, attend design review board. Have you been in front of the design review board yet?
That goes after all the approvals are done, then we go before the design review board. And they will actually look at the lighting.
Do they actually, don't you go to the design review before you hit the commissioners for final? Because I think it would be the exact opposite, because you wouldn't, let's say design review you need to change something.
Yeah,
then
it's always been after, design review won't even, the tradition, I guess, has been that design review, you don't even submit it until all the approvals are in, and then we will submit it to design review. And I know on occasion I've been told, don't even bother submitting the design review unless you get all the approvals. So I don't know if it was more of a timing thing. Dan, I think you're probably...
A lot of times it's building materials, it's the facade that they don't necessarily have ironed down at this point. They have the footprint laid out. As Nick pointed out, there's landscaping issues that they want to see that also is important at this level as well, but that's the final stamp of approval. So if they get into, although under the subdivision code it talks about buffers being 20 feet and not able to see through it, design review is more interested in species of materials rather than just making sure it's thick.
Yeah, and Mark, normally what happens there before design review, that's an architect who makes that application. The engineer isn't really even involved in that. It's really the architect, as Dan said, talking about design, roof lines, facade, and then of course signs is their big thing, is any signage, which I don't think we're changing any signs here anyway.
Okay.
Nick, in general, there's been some newspaper articles about Agnes Irwin taking on a site in Easttown Township for sports fields and facilities. Does that plan affect this plan at all?
Not at all. We've submitted a long-range development plan. That plan still stays the same here. As you see, there are 2 rectangular fields here, which just are not sufficient. And the plan for the Easttown site is to install turf fields. I believe it's 4 rectangular, it's a track, 4 fields, I believe, 2 of which are turf, tennis courts, and 2 softball fields. And not moving the school, not moving any of the school functions there, it's just sheerly...
No gymnasium on the Easttown site?
Because we're putting the new gym here on site,
Okay.
which makes sense too, because during wintertime is normally when you use the gym, so you want it, close to your site, because those fields won't be used probably as much during the winter, if at all.
Okay, thanks. Other questions for Nick? Thank you, sir. Any public comment? No public comment? Any board discussion? If not, may I have a motion to approve or to deny?
I make a motion to approve the application.
Sure, Jim, come on. We'll hold that thought.
I'm Jim Schneller. I live in the same ward, and I bicycle the block at least twice a week. and traverse it otherwise. I'm wondering why if the lines were taken off, did the plan show or explain why the floodplain or any demarcation for floodplain has been removed? Has adequate explanation been given?
Well, that came from FEMA. FEMA updated all the plans in Radnor Township, and any streams that had less than 1 square mile drainage area were removed by FEMA.
Recently?
Recently, yeah,
I
in the
see.
fall of 2009.
Dan, could I ask you, or could I ask the board, are there any other land use ordinances, requirements regarding streams that have, been placed on the plan or otherwise would be looming with, a typical, a smallish creek?
Well, the only other thing probably is riparian buffers that the applicant went to the zoning hearing board to grant, to
I
seek
thought there was
relief.
something. Yeah,
So they have relief to encroach into the riparian buffer.
So I'd like to make a comment to the planning commission based on that, and I see that the design review board is also in the future. But I think it's important that the township encourage wise use of a creek bed. I mean, especially with the school, because the building, one of the existing buildings right now is just a flat wall facing the creek. I don't know how the neighbors in back feel about it, but if you have a valuable creek like that, and the comprehensive plan and the master plan encourage natural habitats, and with a simple placement of a few boulders, which they will no doubt unearth, rather than having a gouged out creek that's seen 20 years of Villanova runoff, make it deeper and deeper. If you could acclimate it to the neighborhood behind it and to the school itself, I'm sure the school would be open to ideas about a natural type setting. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, I don't see any other public comment. Susan, we'll go back to you if you'd like to start again.
Make a motion that we approve this application.
May I have a second? Turn your mic on.
I second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Dan, if you may, and I'll put it on the record, can we put this on caucus, not the next caucus meeting, but the following commissioners meeting, because I'm going to be away next Monday.
So the second meeting in April.
The second meeting in April, yes, and I'll verbally state that we'll give you whatever extensions required. All right, so I know you'll be calling me.
Yeah, you shouldn't need any extensions. This is the first time.
Right.
So you're fine.
All right, thank you.
Just a few other minor things. We still need a volunteer for the Environmental Advisory Council. Any interest, talk to Mark direct on that. Any old business and new business? I have a motion to adjourn. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.